Welcome back to MC351, everybody. It's good to see you again, or not see you again. We're going to pick it up with the camera part of field production. I just realized that probably that shining image is not the most appropriate now. Maybe some of you are feeling like you're going crazy being stuck inside all this time, but hopefully you're not. Hopefully you're having some time to get out and enjoy the beautiful weather. But we're going to again talk about kind of camera related things. We talked about sound last time, so this time we're going to add the picture component to all this. And we're going to talk about a few basics to begin. Let's start just with the real basics and what you need to record your footage. And probably for most of you, that's going to be an SD card. Of course, if you're using a phone, you won't have to worry about this. But let's say you have a DSLR. That's probably what your camera is going to use. If you were able to use some of our cameras here, that would certainly be what we're using. So let's say you have to go out and buy an SD card. Some things you're going to want to look for. Speed, size, and capacity. Let's talk about speed first. You're going to see on this card a little number. That number is the speed of that card, how fast it can write data. You want that number to be as big as possible. Now, if you go to the store today, you would never find cards lower than 10, but maybe around your house you have some old SD cards around and they have a 4 or even a 2 on those cards. Those are really slow cards. They're not made for writing high definition video. So be sure you get that speed as high as possible. You might even notice on this graphic there's a little 3 next to the 10. That's an actually higher speed than just a normal 10 with a 1 next to it. So that's a really good card for shooting HD video. So we look at speed. We also look at the size, which is just the size, the physical size of the card. Try to avoid, for most cameras, those little micro SD cards, with an adapter. They just tend to be problematic at times. Try to get the full size if your camera accepts the full size. And also the capacity. Now I know cards can have really high capacities nowadays. I mean, really high. Personally, I'm a fan of kind of 32 gigabyte is kind of for the sweet spot as far as I'm concerned, just because it gives you enough capacity to shoot a lot of footage. But I'm always worried about having a card that I'm shooting a lot of footage on, but somehow that card malfunctions and then I've lost all that footage. For me, I'd rather just have a bunch of 32 gig cards and be able to swap them out, and if one goes bad, I haven't lost as much. But do what you want, do what you feel's best. Cards are really cheap now. I mean, you can get a 32 gigabyte card at Walmart for $7, so they're not too expensive to get anymore. Whenever you go out and record, it's a good idea to keep a log of your shots. Just write down what that shot was, what the take number was, maybe a little bit of a description of that shot. It's just going to help you in post-production when you're trying to find where your shots are. You know, okay, it's going to be on this card, and it's this many minutes into the card. It's just going to be something that speeds up that editing process. Also, if you're doing something that's more of a narrative project, you probably want to shoot sufficient takes to make sure you have what you need. Whenever you shoot a shot, okay, the recording of that shot we call a take. And that take, maybe it was really good the first time you did it, but let's say you only have one take and there was something wrong with that take, or you take it back into the computer and you realize that clip was corrupted for some reason. It's always important that you have at least 2 usable takes of every shot. So once you shoot one good take, then you're going to get a safety of that shot. That's a second usable take of that same action to make sure you have a minimum of 2 choices in post-production. And that will ensure that if there is some problems, focus, or whatever it might be with one of those shots, you'll have something else as a backup. Tripod versus handheld. Again, I know you don't probably have access to tripods, so it's probably going to be a lot of handheld work for you this semester. but tripod is definitely preferable just because it's going to help stabilize your shot, keep it nice and steady. And I find that most people, they will set up better shots whenever they have a tripod because they're actually thinking about where the camera is as opposed to just grabbing the camera, hitting record, and just wherever they're standing, that's where the shot takes place. So I think a lot more thought goes into shots where you're using the tripod. If you must shoot handheld, and there are good reasons for shooting handheld, make sure you're shooting wide angle. Remember, if you have a zoomed in telephoto lens, that's going to really exaggerate the movement of the camera and make it really hard to watch. So go wide angle to absorb some of that movement. Try to minimize your movement if possible to keep the camera less shaky. And I tend to only want to use it in kind of those visceral moments where you want to make it feel like somebody's part of the action. For those kind of situations, it's very appropriate to use handheld. But for most situations, let's lean on tripod shots. Okay, let's talk about some interior concerns whenever you're shooting out in the field. We talked about this in the last lecture, how we want to avoid white walls. Let's say maybe that's all you have in your house, so you're kind of stuck. What you want to do then is just find some way to add texture or color to that background. So you can always bring in some artwork, some fake plants, whatever it might be. I know you don't have access to lights, but find some way to break up the monotony of that boring background in some way. And again, just going outside even, just with some trees in the background, much better than just shooting up against a boring white wall. As far as light levels, I think we talked about this last time too. Your best bet indoors is going to be to shoot during the day with some window light coming in. Now, when I talk about window light though, I didn't talk about this last time. You don't want to shoot to where somebody has a window behind them because then they're going to be backlit. They're going to be silhouetted, dark, as the background kind of blows out to overexposure. You kind of have a really bad contrast problem there. What we're talking about when we're using windows is have the window off to the side of the person so we don't see the window in the shot itself, but they're being illuminated by that light coming through the window. Looks really nice. And the way you place that person based on how the light's falling on them will determine how that light looks on their face. Another thing that might help, let's say you're getting a lot of light here, but they're kind of dark on this side. What you might want to do in that situation, since you're kind of limited with your equipment, just string up a white sheet off camera on the other side of the window and can use that to bounce some light back onto the other side of their face to kind of add a little bit of fill. That might be effective if you have a really dark, shadowy side to somebody's face. If you are shooting outdoors, if you have a camera that white balances, you'll need to do this often just because of changing lighting conditions, cloud cover, sun moving across the sky. It just creates different color temperatures that we need to stay on top of. You see this shot right here. You see how there are bright areas and then dark areas. And a shot like this is really problematic. Let's say you had somebody that we're interviewing and we placed them right here behind these shrubs. We're not going to see them. Or if we do see them, that sky is going to just be completely overexposed. So we want to make sure when we're shooting outdoors that we have some consistent exposure range that we're working with to avoid situations like this right here. Another thing to watch out for is just simply background action, making sure that there's nothing distracting going on behind that person that's going to take away our interest from where it needs to be. Make sure that the person on screen that we're talking to or shooting, they're the most interesting part of that shot. Okay, let's talk about some coverage. And we're going to talk a lot about documentary style coverage just because that's one of the assignments we're going to be working on this second half of the semester. Let's talk about just getting started. We are going to do the visual storytelling project still. So that's more of a film narrative style project. And then the final project we are doing is the favorite activity project, which is more of a documentary style project. But no matter if you're doing a narrative or a documentary, it's still like a good idea to have a list of shots in mind before you start shooting so you know what you need to get. This is essential if you're doing a film. So what we do is we create a shot list. These are all the shots that we need to tell this story. Now, once we get into the film production class later, I'll talk all about the real specifics that go into doing a script breakdown that includes shot lists. But just for now, just create a list of shots that you need. Maybe you need a long shot of this, medium shot of this. Just jot down the real basics of what you need on a list of paper. And then you can kind of circle those things as you shoot them to make sure you knock them off and don't miss anything. As you shoot, sometimes conditions change, so you might need to add shots to that or take shots away, but that's okay. At least you have a plan in place before you start shooting. Documentary, it's a little different. You can't predict everything that's going to happen, but you still might have a good idea of what to expect and what kind of shots you might need. Another thing to consider is what's called shooting ratio. That's how much footage you shoot in relation to your finished film. Clearly, when we shoot, we're going to have more raw footage than we're going to have in the finished film. But how much more raw footage you have will determine what you have to work with in post-production. You would want more and more raw footage to give yourself more choices in post. We call that a shooting ratio. If you're doing a film, I think for documentaries, 20-to-1 is like bare minimum. That's like bare bones. So let's say you're doing a 2-minute documentary for this class, which is the assignment. You're going to want a minimum of 40 minutes of raw footage to complete that project. But personally, I think that's too low. I would go higher than that. You look at this film right here, Honeyland, which is a beautiful film, and if you get a chance to check it out, please do. But they were shooting for years on this project, 400 hours of footage for a 90-minute film. So their shooting ratio well over 200-to-1. I remember I was shooting this documentary for St. Genevieve, basically the story of the town, and it ended up being like a 9-10 minute film. But I shot hours of footage for that, probably 10 hours of footage for that film, and I still wanted more footage. You can never have enough B-roll, which I'm going to put that slide up here in a second, but the more you shoot, the more flexibility you have in post. When we shoot, we always want to make sure that we do something called pre-roll before each shot. That's just a few seconds of just nothing that rolls before the action begins. All this does, it ensures that we don't accidentally cut off any important action. So let's say here I am on camera, you're going to interview me, you hit the record button, and immediately I start talking. That could be troublesome because maybe I started talking before the camera was actually up to speed, so now you've cut off the beginning of the sound bite and you can't use it. So hit the record button, watch the little counter roll. After at least 5 seconds, then you can say, okay, action, and we can begin the shot. So give yourself 5 seconds on the front end, that's the pre-roll. Give yourself maybe 3 to 5 seconds on the back end, we call that post-roll. So after I would finish speaking, I would just kind of sit here and hold for a minute, cut, and then we've got a little bit of a buffer at the end to help us with editing. So a little bit of pre-roll, a little bit of post-roll during each shot, before and after each shot. What you see there on the screen there, that's called a slate, clapboard. If we're doing a film, we would put that slate in front of the camera before each shot to let us know what the shot number is, what the take number is, other information about the shot, which will be helpful in editing. And also that little clapboard you see, that's going to help us sync up picture and sound if necessary. B-roll. Okay, we talked a little bit about B-roll in last lecture, but this is probably a term some of you have heard before. B-roll is simply the images that we shoot that are going to help tell the story of our interviews, of all the content that we have. So let's say, again, we're going to be interviewing somebody and their main interest is, cooking or whatever. So we do the interview about how they love to cook lasagna. Okay, after we do this interview on that, it makes sense that we need to see them cooking lasagna. But we don't just want wide shots of this. We need establishing shots of them doing it, but also close-ups on their face, on the ingredients, on the lasagna being placed into the oven. All those small details that help tell the story that are going to go along with what that person is talking about. That's the B-roll. That's what makes the video interesting. None of us want to just watch me sitting here talking on camera for 40 minutes, which I'm sorry you're forced to do. But it'd be nice if I had some B-roll every now and then pop up on screen to help tell the story of what's going on. So that's what we want to do with your favorite activity project. Now I'll give you more details. There's details about this on the Moodle page. I'll also talk about this in emails that I send out to you. But just to kind of briefly touch on it here, this week, this first week that we're meeting, your assignment was to shoot an interview. So that's all you have to worry about this first week, just shoot an interview about somebody's favorite activity. Okay, next week, we're going to be shooting the B-roll for that story. So whatever you talk to that person about, you're then going to go out that next week and shoot all the shots that relate to that story. Now there are some specific parameters to this that I've got on the Moodle page, but just to kind of throw this out so you have some expectation, you're going to want to shoot at least 20 shots to help tell this story, at least 20 B-roll shots of different varieties, wide, close, static, moving, different angles, all that good stuff. Because we want variety, we want image variety that's going to make our final project more interesting. I'll talk more about that in the next lecture because that's not part of your lab assignment this week. That'll be part of your lab assignment next week. There is that thing about B-roll as promised. And I know it sounds silly, but it's really kind of true. You're going to go out and you'll shoot some B-roll and you'll think, well, that's more than enough footage. And I promise you, you'll get in editing and there's going to be at least one shot that you wish you would have had. You wish you would have gotten this. Just keep shooting, even though you think this is way too much. You're still going to want more once you get into post. Okay, let's kind of talk specifically about documentary coverage, because documentaries do kind of offer situations that are unique. Because when you're shooting a documentary, things are kind of unfolding in front of you, so you can't really stage things so much. You just have to kind of observe and hope that you're getting what you need while you're shooting. So let's talk about what we call event coverage. That's shooting of something that's happening that has typically a one-time occurrence that you're going to have to be sure you get everything you need. So just a general idea is make sure you are thinking about editing as you shoot. As you're shooting, how are these shots going to cut together? What shots are you going to need to connect this shot to this shot? It's not always easy to figure this out in the heat of the moment, but if you have a basic plan going into production, that will help guide you through the event itself. Some key shots you're definitely going to want to get. You need to get some kind of establishing shot of location to make sure we kind of set the scene of the location, where we're located and how people are arranged in this location. Once we kind of dig a little closer into specific events and activities, again, make sure we establish where people are in relation to each other, so we are oriented to the scene as an audience. But you got to make sure you get in close at times, because that's where the emotion comes from. So whoever your main characters are, we got to make sure we get plenty of medium shots, close-ups of those people. So we're seeing those reactions and emotions. We're seeing how they interact with people. Then all those other little details that just go along with it, just those little small cutaways. Think about what maybe has symbolic value to this story, or what's going to help explain some of the plot of this story. Those kind of things you're going to want to pick up as you're shooting. And again, in the moment, it's hard to pick all this stuff up. You just got to try to make sure you do your best to tell that story in the moment. Let's talk about what this one means right here. Let's say you have a shot of somebody reacting to something. So here I am, I'm looking at something. Clearly it's important to me what I'm seeing. Okay, it's not enough just to see me reacting to something. The audience is really going to want to see what it is I'm reacting to. Well, in that moment, you're going to have to find a way to quickly get the coverage of me reacting to something, then hurry over to the other side and try to capture as best you can what it was that I was seeing. Now, a lot of documentary crews are going to have more than one camera operator, so it's going to be covered that way. But if you are shooting by yourself, you got to figure this out kind of in a hurry. Just whenever you shoot it, you got to make sure that the way you shoot this other shot of what I'm seeing is going to cut with the shot you have of me. And this is something that relates to screen direction, which we're going to do a whole lecture on screen direction next time. But it's really important that we maintain good screen direction so people don't get disoriented when they watch. I think there's a lot of shots that you don't have to get in the heat of the moment. Things like signs that say, you know, dance tonight or whatever you happen to be covering. That kind of stuff could be covered before the event starts or right after the event ends. So don't stress too much about those kind of shots during the moment. Be sure in the moment you're capturing the people and what they're doing. But before and after, that's when you can get a lot of those establishing type shots, the little details that help fill in the story. Use that time effectively, because that could be really important time, I think, for transition shots between scenes, things that help connect one scene or one moment in a sequence together. Those are really vital shots for post-production. Be sure not to rush off after the event's over, because let's say you were covering, like, maybe you're covering a charity auction or something. Right after that charity auction ends, you're tired, you're done, you go away, and you think, I'm going to come back tomorrow and I'm going to get all this coverage. Well, they've cleaned everything up, now it's all gone, the moment's lost. Stick around after the event, get all that footage you need, because it's probably going to go away sooner than you think. If you've got something important happening, try not to panic in those moments. There was a documentary I was working on, and we were interviewing a mother, and she was talking about her son. And during this question, she started to get emotional, and she started to kind of tear up. And I was operating camera, and I was starting to think, oh my gosh, I need to get in close right now, but I don't want to blow this shot, because if I start zooming in and I screw up the zoom, the shot's ruined. So basically I just decided, okay, I'm just not even going to do anything. I'm not going to move the camera, I'm just going to leave it here. And in that moment, that was a safe choice. Maybe I missed a little more detail, but at least I didn't ruin the entire shot. And that's what you need to kind of think of too. When you are in some moment like that, and you do need to make some change to camera, be sure you do it in a smooth way to where it's not going to be really noticeable and jarring to the viewer, and it's going to, and then ultimately pull them out of the story, out of the moment. I like to shoot with my hand on the focus ring, if you have a camera that actually has a focus ring on it, just because things are changing fast, and you need to be ready to adjust that focus as needed. Just realize whenever you're shooting kind of running gun style, it's not necessary to always be zooming in on somebody's eyes to get focus. You just eyeball it, make sure it looks good to you, and it should be fine. But you do need to be prepared for those changes, because focus, depth of field is always going to be coming in and out. You'll need to be adjusting for that. I like to keep the auto iris off while I'm shooting events, because that thing's going to typically fluctuate exposure while you're shooting, which can be really distracting. The downside of not having auto iris is that at times your exposure can get off and you can forget about it, and suddenly you look down and your shot's super dark or super bright, and those shots maybe get ruined. So you do have to kind of keep an eye on your exposure more in those situations, especially if you're shooting outdoors where lighting conditions can change a lot. Probably some of you have handled the camera on Christmas morning. Maybe when you were a kid, your parents gave you the camera and let you kind of shoot what's going on. And years later, you go back and watch that footage, and it's just awful, right? Because here you are moving the camera around constantly, never holding on to any one thing, and it's difficult to watch. Well, that's something we want to avoid when we shoot documentaries. We want to make sure that we're not always being restless with our camera work. Find things to settle in on and hold those moments. I've done this so many times. I've screwed up so many shots where I was in a moment and I'm here, but then I quickly go over here, and then in post-production I'm kicking myself saying, why did I not just hold that shot for even 2 more seconds, and then it would have been a usable shot. You almost have to think in terms of shots as you're in the moment to make sure, okay, I got to hold this, and this other thing can wait, but I'm going to hold this moment right here. Make sure I get this shot in the can before I go over and get this other shot. If you are moving the camera, have some purpose to it. Try to find ways to connect the two things that you're moving between. Here's somebody right here. They're looking at someone. So that's the start. We'll then pan over to the thing or the person that they're looking at. But we're going to have a distinct start and a distinct end to that shot. Try to have start and stop points planned into your movement, so then you're not just kind of wandering aimlessly, not knowing where that shot needs to complete itself. This last one right here, this one's a hard one to describe, kind of talking to the camera like this. It's probably easier if you're here in class for me to explain it, but I'll try to. Okay, this is something that's just not for documentaries. This is certainly something for narrative filmmaking too. And it's the idea of shooting a clean entrance and clean exit for all of our shots. Let me try to give you an example here. Let's say we're shooting a film, and maybe it's even a shot like this, and maybe I'm standing in a doorway right here, and I'm kind of waiting to enter this room. But the camera's on me, right? It's seeing me standing, waiting there in the doorway. So whenever I edit into this scene, it's like, where am I going to cut that shot? Where am I going to start it? I mean, I have no choice to either show me standing, waiting in the doorway, or just cut me in the middle of some motion during the shot, which can be kind of awkward. It would have been much better if I had started outside of the door, out of view, so you don't see anything. We call that a clean entrance, so that I'm rolling on the empty doorway at the start. After a few beats, then I enter through the doorway, and that's going to allow me to edit that scene pretty much anywhere I need to. The same thing would be true if I'm exiting a scene. Let me just get out of the frame completely before you cut. I think a lot of times people will have a tendency to want to follow people too much. Let's say you follow me, and then there's no real end point to it, so you just kind of have to keep following, and the shot goes on longer than it needs to. Instead of just letting me walk out of frame, and then we can cut to a new shot, it's much cleaner. It tightens up the action more. So when possible, and it doesn't always work, but when possible, try to have people enter the frame clean and exit the frame clean whenever they do need to be entering or leaving the scene. And I think that's all we got on this one. Okay, so just a reminder, make sure for this week of lab that you're shooting that interview part of your final project, the favorite activity project. So get that interview done this week, and then next week we'll start working on the B-roll for that interview, and we'll kind of go from there. Okay, I hope everybody's doing well. Please send me an email if you have any questions about any of these assignments or you have technical issues that you're dealing with. Please don't be out there in the dark. I'm here to help you out as I can. So I hope you're doing well. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.